So I know many of you from my career in urban renewal, and earlier this year I made a kind of a surprise career change to do something different. And I know EDCC is not exactly in the business of live LinkedIn announcements, but there's a connection. What I do now is direct a group called the Colorado Educational and Cultural Facilities Authority. And this group provides tax-exempt bond financing for facilities, for educational charities and cultural charities. So education can be charter schools, it can be private colleges, it can be private prep schools, anything but a traditional public school which can issue their own bonds. Cultural can mean museums, performing arts centers, libraries, zoos, sporting facilities. It's a pretty broad definition of culture. And the reason why that's relevant to us all here in this room is because it's really another tool in the economic developer's basket. We want to bring malls in. Congratulations to Thornton. That was a long haul, but successfully done. We want to bring in other kinds of amenities. We want to make our cities attractive to people. Oftentimes, schools are thought of as kind of a pain because they can go wherever they want to go, including sometimes where you'd rather have a tax-producing business go. But schools also bring in parents and families and teachers and contractors and a whole variety of other things. Schools are one of the main attractors of a decision to move to a city, as is cultural attractions. People like to live in cities that have things going on. So the reason I'm blathering on about this is to just tell you about this organization. So when you are doing your business, if you come across a school or a charity and they are looking to expand their building or buy a new building or buy land and you're trying to figure out how to get it done, call SECFA, the authority that sounds like a disease. It's created by statute. The only way to change the name is by a new statute. And yeah, that's not worth it. Anyway, so thank you for indulging me for that. And now I'd like to introduce Vic Ahmed, who will lead this next panel on innovative funding for businesses. Vic, his full bio is on the EDCC website, and it's long, so make sure you got a cup of coffee because he's done so much. So I'm going to read his auto bio because we talked just earlier. Right now, he's the current CEO of the Innovation Pavilion, which is really cool. He's a founding member of the Governor's Innovation Board, otherwise known as COIN. He's also a founding member of the SEC of Tech, the Secretary of Technology, the IT Economic Development Board. He is the current chair of the Manufacturer's Edge, and learned that he's chairman of the STEM Academy, which is a new charter school focused on STEM, just opened where?
It opened 3-4 years ago with Highlands Ranch.
In Highlands Ranch. And so we were just talking. He said, is that a charter school? I said, yes, that's a charter school. Well, we provide taxes and bond financing. We were like, oh, that's good. So, you know, that's how networking goes at these events. So please welcome Vic and the rest of the panel, and we'll hear from them. Thank you.
I can keep this. Oh, I do. That's right. Good morning. So my bio isn't that long. It's just I'm old. So I've collected a few things over the years. My journey on innovation. I just wanted to share a little bit before we get started on this awesome panel that we have here in front of you today. So I'm originally from Pakistan, and I first came to the US when I was in 3rd grade. And it was a trip. We were visiting my uncle who was going to school in New York City. And my mother and my 3 other siblings, we traveled to Rome, Paris, and London, and then flew to New York. And that was an absolutely, for a 3-year-old kid from Pakistan, it was an absolutely amazing, amazing trip, because I'd never seen buildings so tall, had never seen paved roads as they were, had never seen the scale of things that existed in New York City. And clearly it was, to me and my siblings, the most innovative city that we had ever come across. The most striking, of course, was the toy store in Macy's. Did not even know that that many toys existed in the whole world, let alone all in one place. So by the time we went back to Pakistan, to my school, we had forgotten that we had gone to Rome, London, and Paris. We didn't tell anybody we went to Rome or London or Paris. We said we went to America, because that was such an incredible place, and the city that we saw was such an innovative and incredible city. Now, today, from my same school, if somebody from 3rd grade were to travel to some other places in the world and come to Manhattan, they wouldn't be that impressed. They may be impressed by the ski slope in Dubai when it's 120 degrees outside, in a mall, or they may be impressed by the Shanghai skyline, but they won't be impressed by what they see in Manhattan anymore, where the cracks in the road everywhere, and it's not particularly clean. So what I say is that this has been now coming close to 40 years that I first visited New York City. So the world has caught up. At that time, there was nobody even close. And today, people have caught up, and some have even moved ahead of us. However, in innovation and entrepreneurship, we still remain the leaders. And we have a challenge in front of us in order to remain the leaders. All of us need to participate in that process and keep us ahead in that game, because that's where the future lies. And I think cities and economic development organizations have a particularly important role to play. Us at Innovation Pavilion, with our model, have really evolved this thinking also, and we call ourselves almost a 21st century model of economic development. But that's a discussion for another day. Today we have an incredible panel here who is, you're going to learn a lot of things from today, and I will request them to introduce themselves, and we'll go in a certain order because we've got slides in that order. So Ray, if you wouldn't mind starting out, appreciate that.
Thank you for inviting me here today. It's a great opportunity to spread the word about something that's near and dear to my heart. I am the founder and primary organizer of Colorado Crowdfunding. We are now the 3rd largest organization, meetup organization in the nation, dedicated exclusively to crowdfunding and learning and teaching about crowdfunding and advocating about crowdfunding. So we're at the cusp of innovation, and we're excited to be here to tell you ways in which crowdfunding can actually help with economic development, both in terms of private businesses, nonprofits, as well as private-public partnerships, which is probably the most exciting aspect of it all.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks. Laura?
Good morning. My name's Laura Lewis Marchino. I'm the Deputy Director of the Region 9 Economic Development. We are far, far away from the Front Range, about 6 hours by car. We serve the 5 counties, 10 towns and cities, and the only 2 Indian tribes in Colorado. And what I'll be talking about is early stage companies and what we do for innovative financing to get them on their feet, growing and creating jobs.
Thank you. Krista.
Morning, everyone. I'm Krista Morgan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called P2B Investor. It's a financial technology company, and we've created a platform that lets businesses that are not eligible for bank funding raise working capital from a crowd of private and institutional investors. We're about 18 months old. We funded about $100 million of working capital in the last 18 months, 40% of which came to companies in Colorado. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that and sort of how we see finance changing.
Thank you. And then Vipanj, of course.
Hi, good morning. Vipanj Patel. I moved to Colorado in 2000. Vic was one of the first person I met here. I remember that. And similar to Pakistan, I came from India, and I was probably just more impressed with paved roads. I've never seen those before. I came here to start iSherpa Capital, which is a venture capital firm focused on wireless and supporting technologies. We migrated over the years. I'm an investor, basically, also an operator. I run a tech company right now, and then my wife and I do some commercial real estate development, primarily in the hotel industry, but also some land deals and restaurants and things like that. And Not quite sure why I'm here. I'm going to listen to these three bright people and chime in where I can. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Vipanj. I think that's a great question. Why is a venture capitalist here in a conference of economic development people? And I think that is, I'll start off with that question for everybody, right? So, I mean, we all know the traditional role of economic development was basically to recruit companies and to retain companies for those who had moved up a few steps, and really help them when they were looking to build buildings and expand their footprint with permitting and stuff like that. That used to be the traditional role of economic development. Where does helping get access to funding for new companies fit into this? What is this new world? And maybe we can start with you and say, why do you think this whole conversation is even relevant to this group sitting right in front of us?
I need my PowerPoint slides. No. I would say we look at, there are so many needs of entrepreneurs, of businesses, and there, as you know, of the capital stack, you know, there are different places in the process for all of these pieces. And honestly, we need to have all of the resources in front of us. We need to be able to meet the need of every business where they are at. And so venture capital is obviously part of that capital stack. And so that's why you're here.
Anybody else wants? Krista, your thoughts? You are actively involved in this community now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the finance is changing. I think you know, the role of banks and different institutions and sort of the role that they play with companies is changing. And I think there's a lot of new players coming in. I think technology is allowing new types of finance to come into play that we could never have before. And a lot of our job is about educating business owners on what these new options are, how they can leverage them, and really make them work to build their businesses.
Yeah. But are you working with economic development folks in this process? And if so, what role are they playing?
Well, we've been talking to some of the organizations like the SBA and like the local development chapters. I wouldn't say we've been highly involved. I think we'd like to be.
Is there a way they can assist this process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they play a huge role in educating business owners on what the options that are available, like what options are out there. And I think the more they can sort of share those new options with business owners so they feel like they have somewhere to go, you know, the better for everyone.
If you look at it, if I can jump in, Vic,
sure.
If you look at any opportunity, right? I mean, there's three things people are looking for, right? One is they want money to get their business off the ground. Right? Number two, they want to be able to actually get the business launched, right? Meaning the permitting process and just getting it open, right? And number three, they need talented people to go build and operate that business, right? And if I step back as to where economic development can play, those are the three buckets where economic development can play to help businesses get off the ground. And I think where these guys play a critical and an innovative role right now is, if you look at the first one, getting money, the traditional sources of financing, it's too long, right? They don't take the risk that needs to be taken for some of these businesses to get off the ground. And more fundamentally, they just take too long to get things done. They don't move at the pace at which startups do. And by the way, that's a second area in terms of getting the business off the ground. I don't think governments move at the rate that the startups move. And there's probably some learning the governments can get from how lean and how effectively and efficiently startups work, right? And I think these guys play a critical role in actually getting businesses off the ground by being able to kind of supplement that financial need and get it to a point where they can go to a more traditional bank or some venture capitalist or whatever the source it is. I think it's a critical role, but I think if you can look at it from the perspective of those, you know, the three-legged stool, if you will, and get the three legs working together, right? I think these guys can be incredibly powerful in stimulating growth in economies.
Great. Ray, you have...
I think that economic development is actually changing in terms of its face and what it looks like. I sit on a lot of funding panels, and what I began to realize as we talked is that there was a missing piece, and the missing piece traditionally has been the connector, the person or the group that actually connects all the different resources together for an audience. And what I found is that I actually recommend other organizations now much more frequently than I used to, because I've begun to understand exactly what role they play. For instance, I sit on panels with Axion or with Colorado Enterprise Fund, with Colorado Lending Source. So now I know where I can send a business in order to begin. Krista's business is phenomenal. She's joined by 2 other phenomenal sources in the debt crowdfunding space, which is in the microfinance area. It's Kiva Zip, which is for the smallest entrepreneurs. Literally $5,000 you can get first time around and have it for as many as 3 years at no interest. Then you move up the ladder to a company like Kickfurther, which will actually finance inventory on just barely profitable companies that have potentially great margins and can't scale up quickly enough, working capital. And then when they graduate beyond that, they go to someone like Krista to get accounts receivable financing done for them to move to the next step. So what I see happening with economic development is that there are more and more people who are forming or serving in the role of connectors. And it's a continuum from the smallest to the largest. And we have a tremendous number of resources in this state that people just don't know are there. And having people connect those people that are looking for resources to the resources that exist, I think that's how I see it shifting.
So Ray, thank you for your comments. And I'll start my next question on crowdfunding now, which is on a lot of people's mind these days. And, but I'll repeat the context of our audience. I know there's a lot of discussion going on crowdfunding. There are a lot of open questions of what part is doable right now, what are the laws with respect to doing crowdfunding, debt crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding, just grant crowdfunding. Can you help explain to this audience what is your view, particularly in relation to economic development entities, and what they should do in terms of engaging, and why should they engage with this concept and learn from people like yourselves?
Absolutely. A while back, I was given the opportunity to speak to an audience at Scott Converse's Tinkermill. And I was speaking to them on the subject of what we call Regulation A+, which is a brand new regulation that the SEC Commission, the Commission has cobbled together, which literally rolls the clock back in terms of capital formation, very similar to what it used to be in the 40s and 50s when a $35 million company could actually afford to go public. Well, Scott had a question. He said, this Regulation A+, is it possible to use this in connection with public-private partnerships? In other words, the very essence of economic development, because he's very interested in that in the Longmont community. So I had been fortunate enough to spend about an hour and a half with one of the 5 SEC commissioners, Daniel Gallagher, and I knew his counsel. And so I called him up, and I said, Ben, I have a question from one of my colleagues. He wanted to know whether we could use Regulation A+ to do public-private partnerships. And Ben said, well, I know the commissioners actually didn't think about that when they were reviewing it, but you know what? Let me turn you on to a staff member, the Division of Corporation Finance, and let's see if we can get something going. And what we're seeing is that there's a tremendous amount of flexibility, and there are new resources out there where we can have these kinds of partnerships. So I think it's a question of connectors being able to connect economic development people to the resources that are increasingly available.
Great. Anybody else? Vipanj, you have thoughts on that?
No, again, I go back to, I like the word you're using, Ray, right? It's not a new word, but in this context, it's not a word that's frequently used, which is connector, right? As startups, technology, everybody's into it, right? But when you, again, talk about government and entities, right, they tend to operate more in silos, right? And I think the economic development groups, right, of the various regions, whether it's in Colorado or other states, I think that's a perfect term for them. That's the role, right, in my opinion, right, where you guys can really blossom, is to be a connector. You know your community better than anybody, okay? Here's somebody who has got the entrepreneurial zest, and they're coming into your community, and they want to start a business and create jobs, and there's a reason they're coming there, right? They want to settle their roots there, and they want to, you know, kind of have their kids go to school there, et cetera. And if you can connect them, right, with the financial resources, if you can connect them with the, you know, the right folks in the city planning office that can actually, you know, help move the project along, right? If you can connect them, whether it's with the local universities or schools, and go talk to the schools and say, all right, if I'm trying to recruit engineering or technology companies, Great, where's the talent coming from, right? How do you connect, right? And those are again, it sounds simple, but those are the three pieces. You need people, you need money, and you need to actually get your business launched. And if you can actually play a connector role in those three components, I think it can be a really powerful organization. But right now, it tends to work in silos.
Yeah, I would add too that the thing that is interesting about crowdfunding, we hear so much about the term, at its heart, it's really a form of risk diversification that is enabled by technology. So if you imagine that before, you're a bank and you're trying to give a business a $100,000 loan, what you're really asking yourself is, am I willing to lose $100,000? Something goes wrong, I'm on the hook for $100,000, and you think very differently about that money. Now, what you can do is say, like, we can take a $100,000 loan, we can sell it to 100 people at $1,000 each one, because technology facilitates that distribution of risk. And it means that you do need more people. So in a way, what the business owner now needs is a community, access to a community that they can share their idea with, and then leverage the technology platforms to get people investing in their idea at a very micro level, so that not any one person is taking on too much risk. And I don't think I can overstate just how important that this is, and what a shift it is in terms of finance, really being able to do that. And I think you're in a perfect position to really help entrepreneurs, find communities, build communities that will let them, leverage these new forms of finance.
And it's actually pretty, sorry, I was going to say, it's actually pretty interesting, because there's two components to it, right? One is kind of spreading the risk, if you will. But the other thing is the subconscious or the conscious effect that comes with it, right? Like if you look at a lot of the campaigns on Kickstarter, right? Yes, they're doing it for money, but they're doing it for another reason, right? They're doing it to get loyalists, right, that love their product. They're doing it to get somebody who loves their product talk to other people to create other people that love their product, right? And again, it's a similar thing. Again, if you're doing funding, whether it's debt or equity-based, and you're doing it in your community, right, you're getting the support and the buy-in of your community, right? You're getting, if that person made, a small part of the loan into that hair salon or into, right, well, guess where they're going to go, right? They're going to support it. They're going to be an advocate of it. So that it's a powerful ecosystem that's created. It's not, yes, absolutely, money's a key part of this thing. But if you look at these crowdsource, right, and the crowdfunding and all these other things that are going on, right, it's much more powerful than just the money that gets out there.
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to bring Laura in the conversation also. You're an economic developer. How is this conversation resonating with you?
Well, I was thinking about that, and I was wondering if I could get this slides projector. And I'm sorry about that. I should have done that right at the beginning. But I wanted to set some context in terms of innovative funding, with that early stage, before you start looking at some of these alternative programs. And
there you go.
May I? Thank you.
Please.
And I apologize. But I'm hoping that this will create some context. This picture is not up there because it's early for the holidays. But this is to show you, this is the Bluesmobile, and this is actually some collateral from a loan that did not pay off. And so we got a Bluesmobile, which actually now is in the possession of a Catholic church in Texas that bought it for a fundraiser. But what I want to talk really quickly about is how you can be innovative in the public financing arena by getting, state and federal funds and working with clients, which I know all of this builds off of. Right. We are taking a lot more risk with clients. We take any clients that a bank will not touch. And in fact, all of our loans, we have a portfolio right now of 126 loans, $4 million, and our smallest loans, $5,000. And so we just work in our region, but we want to work with the person that is not credit ready. They're not going to get a bank loan. And so we fit in this junior debt idea on the capital stack, which I had mentioned, and I know all of you at the table kind of help with that stack. And I didn't realize I was supposed to run through those at the beginning. But
My fault probably, but
not at all. I heard you were going to test me, so. But basically, we have microloan funds and we do larger funds. And what I wanted to talk about, not so much I wanted to talk about how we've been really innovative, because all of the regional organizations have business loan funds, and we've been able to really innovate, and hopefully that will lead for some discussion, because I'd love to know if you were dealing with this on one end, whether we're helping you or not.
Absolutely.
we work with banks and try to participate with them. So if a bank is willing to make a $30,000 loan for a client and they need $50,000, we will subordinate on collateral that they don't have. We will do interest rate blending to make sure that the payment that they are making is affordable to them. So if the bank is looking at this high risk startup business and they're going to charge 12% interest, we can charge a lot lower and blend that interest rate. We also will take uncollateralized portions. We will take that $30,000 they won't touch, because if that person does not pay, they will not get that money back. And we also will guarantee a portion of the loan by putting money in their bank. So if that loan defaults, we can work with that. A couple other things, we do innovative terms. We can do a 3 to 6 month draw period like a construction loan. If someone gets a $120,000 loan and they only need 60 in month 1, we can actually prorate that and try to help these businesses be sustainable. We do not want your Bluesmobile. We want you to pay off your loan. In terms of seasonal payments, if you have a ski resort and you have your busy season and not, we will make sure that the payments are higher during the season that you are making your sales. We will have escalating payment structures. A business that is growing in 2 or 3 years, we can escalate the payment structure as their sales increase. Longer amortizations, modifications, we will modify loans because we want them to pay. We will do interest only for a while. We will reduce payments because if they can pay, it doesn't matter if it takes them 20 years. We don't want their house. We don't want their Bluesmobile. And then we will do technical assistance grants with loans. A lot of the businesses we work with don't have QuickBooks. They don't know what a financial statement is. We will require that they go to some classes. We will pay them to do that as a grant, and it does not come out of their loan amount. And then obviously we convert loans to equity. We have not been very successful. Thank you guys for doing what you do. We've had 7 loans that we've converted to equity, and we have 1 that actually was a positive. We do personal collateral for business loans. So we have an Airstream trailer right now, so that's our next year's Christmas card. But we're also looking at personal property. We will do deeds of trust on a house. The last 2 things I will mention, we will take cosigners. So if mom wants to cosign $20,000 of a new business loan, we will do that, and they have the limited guarantor on that $20,000. And then finally, we will release deeds of trust if they can refinance it. So if you have a house and you can get a better interest rate, we will give you back your deed of trust, refinance your house, we will refile it, and that job and that business is more sustainable because we're helping them be more financially sufficient. So I wanted to throw that all into this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. But I'll take you back, just one step back to crowdfunding and what you heard the other panelists talk about as an economic development person.
I knew you were going to do that.
What's your reaction to that?
I think crowdfunding is really innovative and important. I love that a business has another option besides, the family, friends, and fools kind of thing, unless that fund, falls into the fools. But I think that is innovative, and I like how you can do that as a startup entrepreneur. You can do that as you grow. You can do that on so many levels, and it's fun to see how that's taking off and how people can actually be an angel almost in crowdfunding and how they can participate in sort of their business's success.
Well, great. You had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think, sorry, Ray, I think it's interesting to look at the UK model. So debt crowdfunding, which is really different to like the Kickstarter. You have like rewards, right. Kickstarter version. You have debt crowdfunding, which is really loans, and a lot of what you were talking about. In the UK, the government has actually made some huge investments into platforms like Funding Circle and Rate Setter, and what they've said is we're going to take public money and put it through and say we actually want you to lend to riskier businesses, and we want our money to go through this, but all the infrastructure, and then you get co-investment with private investors. You can say 50% of the loan is riskier loan is public. Maybe we're taking first risk of loss, and then the other 50% is done with private money. So you're leveraging your public money to get more private money, to get it into the hands of businesses. And I would really encourage everyone to look at it because they've done an amazing job with it. Hundreds of millions of pounds have flown through these loan platforms in the United Kingdom.
And Regulation A+ is ideally suited for that. The other thing I wanted to mention is there's other types of crowdfunding. For instance, Kickstarter gets a lot of the notoriety, a lot of the publicity, but GoFundMe actually did $44 million more last year than Kickstarter did. And GoFundMe is a great place for economic development officers to go with a pet project that might be the beginning of essentially a renovation of an entire community. And what they'll do is they'll raise money on GoFundMe, they will build that particular development, and then by building it, the others come. So there's ways that economic development officers and people concerned with economic development can use crowdfunding without having to justify, is it a profit? Is it a profit-making organization? You just go on GoFundMe and they will entertain a cause that relates to an economic development project. And again, they've been very successful in terms of raising money for those kinds of projects.
Thank you. My intent was to bring up 2 or 3 different areas which are non-traditional for funding. One of them we've talked a little about, which is crowdfunding. The other one that Laura brought up, which is traditional funding with a non-traditional twist, meaning going for a higher risk project than traditionally investors would have gone for. There's, of course, venture capital, and few economic development people have really engaged with the venture capital community because they never felt that that was a direct connection to them. And then, of course, there is this huge new area that's emerging and has been there for a long time but is getting a lot of attention of late, which is impact investing and social entrepreneurship, which again is a huge source of money a lot of people are moving into and all that. So we'll hopefully have a discussion on these 3 things as well. But before that, let me quickly see if there are 1 or 2 questions specifically on crowdfunding. On crowdfunding, we'll come back to that. Yes, sir.
How does it work with the crowdfunding in that you are out raising money and you might give them a gift or something for doing that? How does the SEC feel about that?
It depends on the type of crowdfunding. If you're actually giving them an ownership interest in what you're putting together, you're selling a security. But for instance, GoFundMe, which has raised over $1 billion, those are not investment-based campaigns. Those are pure donation campaigns. Sometimes there's a reward associated with it, and sometimes there's not. So it's not, the SEC has nothing to say or do about that type of crowdfunding.
Yeah, and most of the platforms have spent, if you knew how much money we all spent on lawyers, you would fall over. It's probably, we should have just given it to the economic development.
That's right.
But so the platforms really spend a lot of time making sure they're compliant with the SEC, and there's a lot of change happening in this space and but it's generally the platforms who are managing that and making sure that they're compliant.
Great. One last question on crowdfunding, if anybody's got one, otherwise we'll move on to the next one. Yes, sir.
Are we starting to see a shift toward more equity on crowdfunding? Have we reached that point yet? Or?
Equity is still struggling. Some of the platforms are trying very hard. They haven't had the kind of success that, let's say, Krista's organization has had. The debt area is doing much, much better, and it's growing much faster. Part of the problem is that very small crowdfundings are having a really hard time attracting the creation of platforms, for instance. That's happening in our own state right now. And some of the real estate platforms are really, the model is kind of broken because there's a discrepancy between the platform and their investors on one hand and the deals on the platform and their investors on the other. So there's a bit of a problem in that industry as well right now.
Great. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next subject, venture capital. And that's not a new concept. People are generally familiar with it, all that, on all that stuff. But if you can talk about really how economic development folks can get involved with venture capitalists, what role ought to they play? Because obviously they're not looking for money for themselves. As a venture capitalist yourself, how would you see and how would you give your time, which is valuable time, to economic development people? What would draw you to spend time with them? So what can they do practically in those terms? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, as a venture capitalist, I think Krista mentioned, right, it just kind of these platforms, Ray talked about this too, and how they're evolving is fundamentally changing how businesses get funded and how they get off the ground. And as a venture capitalist, all this stuff is music to our ears, right? The biggest kind of misnomer about venture capital is people think that we take risks. And we obviously do, right? We invest in very risky businesses. 1 out of 10 companies succeed, and all the stats you guys have heard. But fundamentally, our job is to mitigate risk. So believe it or not, we get 1 out of 10 success by trying really hard to not take risks. Okay? Imagine how bad we would do if we actually took risks. Okay? So all these things are great because they help these projects get off the ground, right? And people can test things, because if you take that, right, so there's some source of funding available, okay? Now combine that with, it's 2015, so the cost it takes to test something is significantly less than it was 10 years ago, and certainly less than it was 20 years ago. Okay, I remember, Vic, back in 2000, right, we'd raise $5 million to build a prototype. Well, you could build a prototype for 50 grand today. You could build it for $100,000, right? And so you're able to test things and get them off quicker. You're also able to do things much faster, right? And again, this is kind of in the tech world, right? You're able to use open source and all this stuff, use the crowdsource funding and all this. Krista comes in a little bit later because you have to have customer and the debt part of it, right, in order to do financing. But that's great too. I remember, we used to have to go work with Silicon Valley banks and all these onerous terms around, I'm going to take your first child, which we were happy to give away frequently actually. But other than that, they would do all these things. And alternative sources to actually enable a business to grow and eliminate that friction, I think those things are great. And so now if you look back at, again, I get back to the role of the economic development, what we're looking for are opportunities that can kind of, scale and build a large business in your areas, right? So if you can play that role, that connector role of, oh, here's some entrepreneurial people, right? They got some ideas. Let me connect them, right, with the Lauras and the Rays of the world, and they'll connect them with some other folks that are the platforms. They get something off the ground. Maybe they connect them with. See, now you're going to get to something that's interesting to a venture capitalist, where it makes sense for us to come in and whatever that check is, right? Whether it's $1 million check or $5 million check or $50 million check, but help get these companies to a stage where it's a sustainable, scalable business. That's what we're looking for. Right? If you think about venture, because 1 out of 10 succeed, right? We can't invest in a company that's going to generate a 10x return for us. We have to try to find one that's 100x, right? Because it's got to make up for the others, which means we need a company that can go from 1 million, 10 million to 100 million in revenue, right? Not 1 million to 1.2 million to 1.6 million, right? So if you guys can kind of play that role of finding the people, helping them get talent, helping them connect with those sources, get their businesses off the ground. And by the way, the other thing with venture capitalists, and Vic knows this well, is just because we don't want to invest until they're scalable doesn't mean we won't work with companies before then, right? I talk to entrepreneurs all the time and help them, right, give them ideas and suggestions and connect them with people to kind of test their idea and get it off the ground, right? And so I think you can leverage the venture community, right, to figure out what type of businesses can be scaled and built in your business, in your areas, who the good entrepreneurs in your areas are, and then connect them with the right folks, and let's help them, flush out their business.
Great.
I sat on a funding panel up in Longmont a while back, and there was a gentleman from the Colorado Impact Fund, and you probably know more about it than I do, but what I found very interesting about his comments, and they're kind of at the center of economic development in a specific area, which is kind of the green technology, healthy, sustainable foods, that kind of area. And what he said was, we have $70 million, and we're an experiment. What we're trying to figure out is whether we can produce the kinds of traditional returns that venture capital can get in some brand new areas that have traditionally been not funded or underfunded. And I thought that was really interesting, that they're willing to risk essentially venture capital money, and so they are taking a risk that's even greater than the risk that you'd ordinarily take. Well, that has to spur economic development in some sense. There may be a lot of failures, but there also are some successes that would never, ever have seen the light of day. So I think venture capital is making a contribution in terms of economic development by taking those kinds of alternatives and running with them.
Thanks, Ray. I'll open up for 1 or 2 questions on venture capital and think not that Anybody else on venture capital? We'll come right back to you. Nope, please.
So this is a general question. Region 9 and our group fund and manage the accelerator program in Durango, Colorado.
If you can repeat the question, please.
So yeah, Region 9 and our group help fund and manage a new accelerator program in Durango, Colorado. And what we're finding with the graduates of the program is that the money they need to market their product or their service at a national level is not available. This is marketing money is what we're finding out that they need and that they're unable to get. So we're losing companies. One, for example, just left for Vancouver, British Columbia because they need to be in a thicker market in order to get their product going. What's available to help companies fund marketing? Especially it's probably true in Denver as well, but I think especially in rural markets, to get word out that your product exists is not cheap. And that's where we're seeing a challenge right now.
So I'll start by saying, generally for marketing, R&D, that's where really you're selling equity in your company. So what you need, especially at the early stage out of accelerators, are angel investors, and smaller funds, of which there are a lot more coming up in Colorado. I mean, our company has raised $4 million, most of it from Colorado private investors. In equity. And I think a lot of it's about education. There are 7 million accredited investors in the United States. There are less than 5% of them are active angel investors, taking a portion of their money and being able to invest in a company that's coming out of an accelerator and give it $25,000 so that they can go and do marketing. And a lot of the reason they don't do it is because they don't know how. They're not quite sure where to go. They don't want to do it alone. So facilitating the creation of angel investment groups, inviting leaders in your community who are sort of at that accredited investor level to come and make sure they're watching companies at demo day and really just helping that network grow, I think, is hugely important. I think the only way that you can do it, it's really about finding the people with money and helping educate them on how they can invest in those companies. That'd be my thought.
And what I'd like to suggest is sometimes, depending on the amount of money you need and whether you need it all at once or whether you can get it in increments. One of the success stories, which when I first heard about it seemed like a failure story, was there was a company that was developing an app and decided to do a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. She was raising $20,000, but in order to raise the $20,000, she ended up spending $18,600. So I said to her, well, are you satisfied with that outcome? And she said, well, if I had to do it over again, I'd probably shop around a lot better in terms of service providers who are going to be giving me the different pieces I needed, public relations, task mastering, et cetera. But I am satisfied. And I said, why? And they said, because that Kickstarter campaign gave me a lot of notoriety, gave me a lot of, I got on the radar. As a consequence of that, there was a company in Canada that wanted to invest money in their business. They were investing $500,000 for 10% of the company, which valued the company at $5 million immediately. Because of that, accredited investors decided that they liked the company because of an exit strategy we talked about down the road for them. And so they were willing to invest $2 million. So from kind of the small acorn, a giant oak tree grows. If you plan it out so you can kind of step by step into the marketing program, instead of saying, here's what we need in order to blow it up, 2.7 million, I have a client like that right now. How can you start the process? How can you nibble, pieces away, and what kind of traction can you gain? And in her case, she did quite a bit on the 20,000, which the crowd paid for.
Great. Let me move on to impact investing and social entrepreneurship. And Ray, you already made some comments on that already. What are your thoughts on how economic development entities can play a role in understanding that trend and connecting that to deserving projects?
Well, I think what has to happen first is the economic development entity has to decide what level of participation and involvement it wants. Some really aggressive EDCs are willing to actually look very favorably on public-private partnerships. And I think that's, as Krista has said, That is a really good way to leverage public money, and it's been seen that it's been very successful in the UK. They've done a lot of really good things about pairing public money and private money together, and pairing accredited money with non-accredited money. So if you're really looking at jump-starting the engine of economic growth, and you're willing to entertain the concept of partnering with other organizations, some of which may not be nonprofits, but which may be profit-oriented, I think you might gain a lot more traction a lot more quickly.
Yeah. Any of you guys, any comments on particularly impact investing and social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a huge area, right? And again, this is because of the way the industry's evolved, right? People have the luxury to be able to do these things. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a couple of, I mean, there's been in the press a lot lately, right? I mean, I think it was Peter Thiel, right? Put that famous quote out there, right? We were promised flying cars and all we got was 140 characters, Twitter, right? And Elon Musk has made a big deal about this thing that, you know, he thinks it's really sad that the brightest and the best engineers and the kids in computer science are going to do Twitter and Facebook and Instagram instead of solving, you know, real problems in the world, right? And he's really started to stir, you know, kind of stirring the pot over there. And you're starting to see a lot of kind of talented people looking to do things. Yeah, I want to solve big problems, and yeah, I want to make money, but can I do both, right? Can I solve a problem, you know, I'm not sure going to Mars is a problem, but that's a problem, right, that Elon Musk is trying to solve. Yeah. And I think that it's leading more towards the social impact investing type of stuff, right? If you look at it, one is just pure social impact investing, which is, yeah, I'm going to throw some money out there, and if I can get a return, great. But if I don't get a return, I may still spend my $7 million because it did something for me, right? That's kind of the pure altruistic. There's others, which is, I want to make money, but how do I make the world better, right? Whether it's greener or whatever. A tremendous amount of innovation going on in all of these things. Like if you look at Colorado, right? A lot of energy stuff, a lot of agriculture, a lot of food. Amazing innovations going on in all three of those. Right? So again, what I would encourage you guys to do, and I don't know what the best vehicle is, right? But again, if you can be that connector, is there are entrepreneurially minded people in each of your areas. I guarantee it, okay? There are people that have money and have been successful in each of your areas. I guarantee it, okay? They are in your region for a reason. They like it. They live there. They want to live there, okay? Connect the dots, bring in those people, help them to build that business. Okay, I don't know what that company does, but I bet you it's more than just a marketing problem if they moved. Okay, so what is the product, right? How do you scale this thing? Connect the people who are already passionate in your area, get them to be the angel investors, get them to be the advisors, connect those people and the startups with these awesome resources that are out there. They will work together to get these projects out the ground. And you need one success story, okay? It's just like when we go raise money, what do you need, right? You need that customer. Okay, if I'm going to come to you with, you know, try to get an AR line, what do I need? Well, I need some AR. If I come to you with $100,000 of sustainable AR over the last 3 months, you're going to be more interested than, hey, next month I'm going to have my first customer, okay? So put a little more effort up front, right? Finding those people, finding that opportunity, make that a success, and I guarantee the others will flock.
And invite more of the different demographics. I mean, sometimes what happens with economic development is that very senior people are running those functions, and you're not getting input from much younger people who might actually have a completely different way about going about whatever it is that you really want to be able to accomplish. One of the things that happened to me is I was recruiting a young man who's a bright young guy into my organization to be one of my moderators and to help. And he said, on one condition, and I said, what's that? That you read this book, Conscious Capitalism. And I was fascinated that he was imposing this condition on me, but I guess invite more participation by different types of people. Don't listen to just the people that you've always listened to. Listen to a broader range of people when it comes to economic development.
Yeah. So
I would say as an economic developer, I see that we get that all the time, that is what we're getting because, you know, they have this great idea and they want to do all these things and we're trying to figure out how to get them to you. And there are so many that aren't ready or that need so many basic steps, you know, that you're never going to see them. But I feel like that really is a niche of economic development because we can be change agents, we can kind of turn on a dime. We're not traditional financiers where we know half of them walk in and they have that great idea and they think they should get a venture capitalist involved like tomorrow, and you're trying to, well, you know, and you walk them through the process, and there's so much time that you're spending with folks. But I see that that is the trend, the social entrepreneurship, huge. There are so many people that want, and what we're missing is the economic developers are not just trying to build them for financial readiness, they're having to walk them through, and many will never get to that point. So how do we still make them successful in a, you know, a small scale capacity? That's what we're seeing.
And if you want to introduce diversity, true diversity to your organization, talk to Krista. They have a mission statement about creating, like reaching out. I remember she wrote a blog recently where she said, we're pretty diverse, but I really have one regret, and that is our IT department is all male, and I want to get more women coders in there. So there's ways you can learn this skill.
So much more conversation to be had. Unfortunately, we are out of town. These guys will be here at least for a few minutes during the break. So if you have questions, please come up with them. I'll summarize this thing by saying that, in my mind, there hasn't been a time like this for economic development with so much change happening in so many different ways, particularly the focus shifting from baby boomers to millennials who have now increased in population beyond baby boomers, and most of the towns and cities have been built around baby boomers, and the interest of millennials is quite different. So with that, I want to thank the panel. Great conversation, great thoughts, great ideas, and please reach out to them in person or through their emails or whatever if you have other questions. And thank you for coming today.